have to focus on a product. We learn how to evaluate a deal, specifically how to be a master at evaluating in a very quick way so that you can determine if you want to go further with the deal. It pays to actually know your stuff. You know your numbers, know how to evaluate. I'll give you an example. I was recently doing a mentorship, and some of you guys already know the story, in St. Thomas. And when I went to St. Thomas, I was trying to, when I usually do a live mentorship, you know, they pay a lot of money. And so I want to make sure that not only do they get training, but they see me in action, because then they can model my behavior and some of the things I do. Typically, whenever I go do a deal, I carry my calculator with me. The reason for that, any opportunity, anything that I can do, I can quickly run numbers right there and not be guessing. So I went with them, and we ultimately went to it was supposed to be a mortgage broker. Went in there, started asking them questions about the local markets, and it's obviously St. Thomas, a little bit different than here. And so I was trying to find all the programs, what the debt service coverage ratio was, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because that's one thing we didn't cover. But long story short, I get to talking to the vice president of the company, and we're having a conversation about what's going on with the market, what are the numbers, and then he throws out this weird number when we were talking about financing. And he gave me an example, and he basically said, well, so basically your debt service would be blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, things didn't sound right. So I said, excuse me, I'm sorry. I pull out my sword, right? So I pull out my sword, and I go, I'm sorry. Well, how much money did you say it was? Because my number says this, and the guy goes. And I said, quite frankly, I'm not looking for this kind of, I'm looking for this kind of return. So what happens when you know your numbers like that? Well, let me tell you what happens. In this conversation, we went from telling me what's going on in the marketplace to saying, well, I have a property right across the street. See that property right there? I want to sell it because I have a little illness and I have to go get it taken care of, and you have to manage this property here. I'd be willing to sell it finance. In a place where one of the questions was, I don't think they do seller financing here. Why did he do that? Because he knew that he could entrust me with a note. He knows the deal enough to stay in it, obviously, but he's ill. So he's thinking, this is a guy that I could sell to, and I'm willing to hold a note because I'm going to get a nice return on my profit. But this guy right here knows his stuff. So I trust him enough to then have a conversation about perhaps him buying one of my properties with seller financing. So again, it pays to know your numbers. It pays to use your calculators and to master that, because when you're having a discussion with a real player, if you pull out your calculator and run real numbers, by the way, don't go in there and be like 2 + 2 is 4. We're talking real numbers. Debt service coverage ratios, break down some mortgage payments calculations, which, by the way, are very simple when you have a cool calculator like this. Then what will happen all of a sudden is these people say, you're for real, so let's talk real business. Right. So literally, this chick who's with me is looking at me going, wow, we had this discussion with this guy, and we never had any opportunities, and now this guy's telling you of a deal that he's about to put on the market. And he wants you to just take over it. So we walk in, walk the deal, I'm asking them questions, so they're learning, watching me. But what blew them away the most, they were just like, I didn't even know they did these kind of transactions here. And again, he may not have mentioned it to them because he's thinking, yeah, right, you don't even know what you're doing. But when they know that you know what you're doing, opportunities open up for you because you know you'll be a better steward of it. So that's something to consider.